The Course of Biblical Typology, Part 6, The Other Side of Typology. Note that those events that have a clear typological connection are not always necessarily positive events. An example of this is the correspondence between the sin of Achan and his family and the sin of Ananias and Sapphira. The fact that these stories typologically correspond to each other we will consider in one of the following parts. Typology deals not only with the representation of God's deeds, but also with such an earthly reality as the fall and retreat of man. Therefore, events such as the apostasy of the Israelites during the Old Testament period clearly correspond to the apostasy of the Christian church over a long historical path. The great struggle of good and evil. Usually, or rather always, when they talk about typology, they mean that its creator and creator, by and large, was God himself. The biblical authors could only notice this revealed typology and bear witness to it, but God is not the only one with creative abilities in the universe. Lucifer did not participate in the creation of this perfect world and man, which may have been one of the reasons for the gap between him and God. But Satan's claims already show that he possessed considerable creative power. After all, we constantly feel his creative abilities expressed in the perversion of God's creation. Created in the image and likeness of God, endowed with enormous creative potential, Satan directed him into the terrible channel of sin. Nevertheless, it is grandiose in its power, but it is not only in the natural world that Lucifer's creative power is felt. It is present, without a doubt, in the creation of a person's spiritual life, even in his mystical experience, for example, spiritualism and so on. And if in the earthly history reflected in the Bible, the Lord created his own positive typology, a typology not defiled by sin, with the aim of saving man, then the devil at the same time created his own typology of sin and vice, which the biblical authors have testified to us, because the Bible is a book describing the great struggle between Christ and Satan. And it describes the actions of both warring parties, and they are described in relation to people's lives. Satan's creations, including his typology, are somewhat similar to God's creations. Satan is essentially plagiarizing God's creation, driving it through his sin-tainted nature. Sometimes he simply parasitizes God's creation, experimenting on nature, remaking the man created by God in his own sinful image. And if we open the Holy Scriptures, we will see how his enemy uses the most insidious techniques in his struggle against God. Later in the same course, you will find a fairly detailed commentary on selected chapters of the book of Daniel. Here, I would just like to point out some general principles that are noticeable only when looking at the book of Daniel from a bird's eye view from the height of its organizational structure. The typology of Daniel. Let's look at some aspects of the book of Daniel, and let's start this review with the 7th chapter, the heart of the whole book. The vision of the prophet Daniel described in this chapter is outlined against a background that combines water and 4 heavenly winds, 7th chapter, 2nd verse. In the context of the previous part of the course, which dealt with the language of Genesis, we can say that here we are talking about some kind of strange creation. This similarity is further aggravated when we read about the 4 beasts coming out of the sea, but these animals are completely different in appearance and character from those that the Lord created in the beginning. These animals are bloodthirsty and scary. They are also the result of creation, but they are emphatically unclean animals. The fact that in the 8th chapter the vision is repeated through the images of pure animals, Aries and goat, does not make them pure at all. Interestingly, the picture of creation is complemented here by the fact that after these beasts pass through the arena of history, someone who is created in the image and likeness of the creator of these animals appears. A king shall arise having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty, and also the holy people. 8th chapter, 23rd and 24th verses. Here and further the promises that were given to Adam, Noah, and Abraham are expressed, but in a perverted, sinful, unclean form, about the earth and dominion over it. Interestingly, the 7th chapter, after it speaks of the appearance of this king of the Lord, verse 24, says that he shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. Verse 25. Adam was created on the 6th day, and his next day in time was the Sabbath, a holiday that he observed while communicating with God. The same king is fighting against God and is trying to abolish change times and law. Before us is a creation polluted by impurity. We have a realistic picture of this world lying in sin and evil. Yes, God is constantly invading this kingdom of evil. He does not give it entirely into the hands of Satan, but at the same time he recognizes that this world is not entirely God's. This is not a world above. This is this world lying according to its sins in the arms of Satan. About the forgery. The 7th chapter emphasizes that after all these beasts entered the historical arena, a small horn appeared after them, and in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. The 7th chapter, the 8th verse. In a way, this is a good summary of all of us sinners. Each of us has someone we look at and mentally say, "Thank God I'm not like this one." And that's pride. But Daniel is not writing about a simple sinner. He writes about the prophetic Antichrist, the man of sin. Here it is a great fake of the satanic man, the crown of creation of the prince of darkness. She is entirely of this world. The lesser horn originated from the horn of one of the animals. How Eve was made from Adam's rib. But here, in the 7th chapter and in the next 8th verse, it is also said about the true ruler of the universe, whose kingdom still remains not of this world, see verse 10, but who is already preparing to take the reins of government into his own hands and execute judgment on the world of fake creation. And when this judgment begins, the true Son of Man appears, who was brought to the old days, and to whom. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. Verses 13 and 14. Here is a genuine and eternal dominion as opposed to a fake and temporary one. So we have seen that the language of creation, and with it the language of typology, extends not only to God's creation but also to the devilish, perverted recreation. He uses his creation to oppose God's creation and actually parasitizes God's creation by perverting it. This is especially noticeable in comparing the book of Daniel with the book of Revelation. In particular, the 4th chapter of the book of Revelation presents a picture of the throne of God. The first thing John begins to describe the throne is with a description of the rainbow. As we already know from the language of the flood and creation, the rainbow was a symbol of the eternal and indestructible covenant. The world should never have been drowned in the waves of the flood. Here the rainbow has a similar but typologically superior meaning. She appears as a symbol of the eternal and unchanging power of God and the steadfastness of the kingdom of heaven. To further emphasize this point, below we talk about the glass sea, about the sea that is unable to open up and sink anything. It is a symbol of immutability, inviolability. And next, beyond the sea of glass, we see the image of 4 animals full of eyes in front and in back, verse 6. These animals are different from the animals that God created when He created the earth. They are clearly superior to them. Terrestrial animals, for example, should have received their name from humans and, consequently, received their own characteristic enclosed in this name. Celestial animals are full of eyes, which indicates the fullness of their knowledge. But they also have some similarities with earthly beings. The first living creature was like a lion, the second living creature like a calf, the third living creature had a face like a man, and the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle, verse 7. But if these animals are simply superior to those that came out from under the hand of the Creator during creation, then at the same time they are opposed to those 4 animals that come out from under the hand of Satan. But now we are faced with the question, was this challenge of Satan, who wanted to speak the language of God's creation, noticed and accepted by the biblical authors and somehow used by them, or did they ignore or not notice it? We assert that the biblical authors used this language, and with it the concept of type-antitype, to describe events related to the activities of Satan throughout history, about actions that are most vividly and therefore typologically excellent, although both type and antitype are not divine categories in this case, manifested myself at the end of the story. Schiss, Typology of Revelation. The book of Revelation shows that God accepts the challenge that Satan throws at him. The 7th chapter of the book of Revelation begins with a picture painfully similar to the one presented in the 7th chapter of the book of Daniel. Compare these texts. I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. The book of Revelation, 7th chapter, 1st verse. I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. The book of the prophet Daniel, 7th chapter, 2nd verse. It is obvious that the angels holding these 4 winds, the winds that undoubtedly have creative and destructive power, are holding them back. This was not the case in Daniel, where the winds wrestled on the sea from some kind of creative activity. Angels holding the 4 winds. It is interesting to note that in the Bible, the sea has the meaning not only of an element capable of producing and destroying, but also the meaning of nations. The winds, spirits, ruach of Satan, are aimed at making something out of the tribes and peoples of the earth. In Daniel, they are represented as floating freely, and the result of their creative activity are animals or powers that alternate one another on the historical stage. In John, these winds are held back, which shows that God doesn't allow Satan to turn around at this time and create more animals from the people. And yet, at some point, the bonds that bound these winds were loosened, and in the 13th chapter we read, Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. Book of Revelation, 13th chapter, 1st and 2nd verses. We see here again the diabolical, parasitic creation that defiles God's creation. The reference to the many heads and many horns crowned with diadems, as well as the compilatory nature of the beast, leopard, bear, and lion, are intended primarily to indicate a typological superiority over those animals that Daniel once saw. And the superiority of this beast is that Satan himself works in him in a special way. The dragon gave him his power. The superiority of this beast over the former ones also lies in the fact that, unlike them, it does not wage war with other animals, but with saints. Moreover, he is given the power to defeat them. Verse 7. And he also seeks, though unsuccessfully, to take over the entire earth and all its fallen inhabitants, and this is the fulfillment of promises in a sin-perverted sense. Verse 8. But still, this animal is rude and imperfect, deliberately domineering and carnal. Therefore, after the water produced this monster, a further pattern of creation unfolds, namely, the earth produces another beast from itself. Verse 11. He doesn't look rude anymore. He's a lamb. But the fact that this is a creation of Satan is evident from the fact that this lamb speaks like a dragon. It is interesting to note that such a forgery of God's creation and the image of the lamb is not accidental. Just now, in verse 8, we could read that everyone worshipped the first beast, except those who worshipped the lamb. That is why Satan needed the humble image of the lamb, in order, if possible, to deceive the elect as well. That this is his purpose is evident from the statement of the 12th verse. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. The Bible, however, shows that the real lamb is in a completely different place at this time, the book of Revelation, the 14th chapter, the first verse. And with him are the people who follow and worship him. And here there are real animals or creatures created by God. Verse 3 of the same chapter. The scope and focus of our research does not allow us to continue our review of the typology, which was not created by God, but modeled on the divine typology. The typology of sin is by no means limited to the examples we have given above, but there are already enough of them to make sure that such a typology exists and that revealing it is one of the main goals of the biblical authors.